was just looking there at the stack sizes and how close 33 big blinds is big stack and 23 big blinds is short stack. 33, 32, 32, 23.
Yeah.
That means that all the shorties
There's no such thing as a shorty anymore.
have departed, and all the stacks are now consolidated into chunks.
And shout out to Fergberger. Haven't spoken to you in a while, but shout out to you. Looking at the chat, PG is back. Poker Gremlin, welcome. And Fox2703. We aren't going to be keeping up with the chat. It's just going by too fast, but when we have a moment, we'll give a few shout outs, especially if you've been with us all week long, as many of you have. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with myself tomorrow, Tower. I mean, it's been 7 days of commentating. It's been an absolute pleasure being alongside the voice of British poker, the voice of the GOKPT, and I'm going to want to be talking. I might be talking on the plane like this, and all of a sudden people are going to be looking at me funny.
Yeah. Can you please fasten your seatbelt in seat number 1?
Full pre.
So we have an interesting spot here. Stephen has raised under the gun with pocket threes. Colum's elected to call from the small blind with 7-5 suited. And Sergey has found an ace in the big blind. And he folded it. Wow. We did see him shove 40 big blinds before with a worse ace than that. So it's fair to say Sergey's mixing it up.
And not the worst flop in the world if you're going to be calling with 7-5 suited to get 2 clubs on the board. Steven should also be kind of thrilled with this flop, because unless he thinks Colum was flatting with like a pair, he's not flatting with very many 4s, and it's very unlikely he has a queen.
One of the 2 remaining queens, yeah. So Stephen would probably try a fairly small bet here, just to fold out hands that have 20 to 25% equity. And he has bet just under 1/3 pot.
And Colum actually has more equity in this hand than Steven, because also the 4 would give him some love, and the 5 and the 7.
Let's take a quick pause here and ask a fundamental question that a lot of poker players are faced with. Should Colum be raising his flush draw on this flop?
I think the answer is mostly yes on this kind of a board in this spot. There's just going to, like, practically... the player, the cutoff in this case, is just going to be betting this so often with such a big part of their range, sometimes their entire range almost, that I think this is just a pretty clear raise. You're just going to get so many folds.
Which is, of course, what you want when you have 7 high,
yes,
even though you have a flush draw. It might be different if you have the ace high flush draw, because you could consider calling down on future streets as a hero call. But with 7 high, with no showdown value, it feels like in practice, raising is a little bit of a better decision.
Yeah. Also, if we had an ace high flush draw like ace 10 of clubs, the 10 or the ace may be good if we were to hit them and vault us into the lead against a hand like pocket 8s or pocket 9s. That might be 6 more outs.
Right. However, the solver prefers the call that Colum makes here versus the raise.
Yeah.
And we think the reason for that is simply that it's hard for Colum to raise for value here at these stack depths and feel good about it unless he has something like 4 is full, because he doesn't have a ton of ace queen. If he has something like queen 10 and he raises and gets 3-bet, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
You can't raise fold that hand, but you're in big trouble against the range that Zadelhoff is going to be continuing with there.
For sure.
So I think for balance's sake, that's why the solver wants to just call with a 7-9 flush draw.
Yeah, from an EV point of view, there's a half a blind difference, which is significant, but it's not monstrous.
Right.
Before we get to the turn, we have to pay the bills and acknowledge Nitrogen Sports Poker. They're our sponsors. And at the end of every month, we have our massive overlay tournament where they guarantee 1,000 buy-ins. Costs less than $1 to play. We usually get like 100 players. It's unbelievable amounts of free money.
Definitely worth playing. Also worth playing because if you win, they pay you out fast. Nitrogen is a Bitcoin-only site. They pay you in 90 minutes or less, which is kind of unheard of. I love it. You'll love it too. Get on Nitrogen. Use the link that we tweet out. When we tweet about our hands, use that link. Get you some poker.
But almost everything has lots of equity against you now. You can see now the 5 has got there. I think Stephen might just slow down here and check behind now.
And Colum would likely be calling most bets unless it's a really big bet sizing, and that would be very risky for Steven when he does have that showdown value.
Oh, look at this.
Oh my, this could be fireworks.
Look at this.
Flush completed.
Flush versus
full house completed.
Full house. Yeah, the one thing that might save Colum in this spot is that he does only have a 7 high flush, so he shouldn't go too mental. Now, quite a tricky decision whether to bet out or not. He probably will bet here, figuring that Steven is going to check behind a lot. Obviously, Stephen wouldn't be checking a hand as strong as pocket 3s, but Stephen a lot of the time has ace high here or a pair. So Colum is probably going to lead out targeting those hands. He's going to be raised then, and then he's going to have a tough decision, I think.
Yeah, and I think if Colum does check, he's not going to, but I think if he did, Stephen's bet sizing is going to be pretty large, knowing that some of what Colum was calling with is a flush draw.
2.25.
So Colum's gone for a small bet. He's basically just trying to get a cry call from an ace high or a pair here. But Stephen is clearly going to raise here now. Now the only question Stephen has to ask himself is how much he wants to raise. He has to try and think about the type of hands that Colum has. Colum could have a queen here. Colum can have made the flush as well. Flush draws are another part of the range of hands that will call you on the thing.
Ooh,
so
look at this.
Looks he's going chunky.
reaching
Yeah,
big.
he's putting pressure on here.
This is at least 6 million. Let's see. It's not as big as I think because I forget sometimes that these
That's true, actually.
250 and not
Yeah.
500K. So I think it's about 6 million and not 10 million, which it first went
Yeah.
into my head. 6.3 million.
This is a really tough spot for Colum now because he only has to call, and you can see the pot is 15 million. So he's getting actively 3.75 to 1. And he has made the call because
I
he has
can't
the
think
flush.
he ever can fold there.
No,
Yeah.
I don't think so. He has a lot of worse hands there.
Okay, let's acknowledge this card is just like a complete piece of shit card for Mr. Colum here.
It's a
like,
classic one out to hell card.
yeah. The announcers, by the way, not enough of a reaction when this card comes. There is one card in the deck that will create action and be an insane card. This is it. They're like, oh, look,
Hey, that's a card.
it's the 3 of clubs.
Works.
Look at this.
Flush completed.
Flush versus
Full house
full
completed.
house.
We get Colum betting. He's trying to get value from a lot of stuff.
Makes sense.
But his range is extremely strong here, right? With
Almost
the
too
line that
strong.
Colum has taken, he has kind of a queen plus.
Yeah.
If Colum has 2 10s here and decided not to 3-bet pre-flop, certainly he's check calling the flop. Is he betting the river? Probably not.
Probably not. It's almost a problem to have a range this strong. It can't actually be, of course.
Right.
But like, it's hard to get called by that many worse hands. Like, if you have two, if your opponent has 2 jacks, like Zadelhoff has 2 jacks. I mean, what are jacks supposed to do when you bet this river? Like, don't you usually have a queen or a flush? Like most of the time, or you have to be turning two nines into a bluff, which I guess you could do, but often that hand is good and you don't need to do that.
It seems unlikely
pair
that
is
you would
usually
turn
good.
2 9s into a bluff.
Pair is good enough of the time, so it's just hard to get value.
But it's also hard to imagine Zadelhoff betting as a bluff too frequently on this
Agreed.
run out with this action on the club on the river.
Yep.
So I think betting is just the lesser of 2 evils here. And I understand why Colum bets. Although, as we see what happens, I think his life could have been made a little bit easier if he bet bigger. He could get more value from the heroes, and he could have a much easier fold if he bet something like 75% of pot.
Yeah, and something you said on the podcast, which I thought was really smart, was we should bet more when we have a strong range.
Yeah.
And even though we're targeting sort of a weakish range to call, they're going to have almost a binary decision between yes or no, whether we bet this smaller amount that he ultimately bets, or like if we make it, 3 times bigger, not 3 times, but twice as big or something like that. Yeah.
Right. Nonetheless, we're not against a bad hand that's just going to call. We're against 3s full, which of course Zadelhoff raises. You have to raise. It's kind of a poopy raise fold spot with 3s, but you have to raise.
One thing at a time.
Right. Not much to say about this. We prefer a slightly bigger sizing, but that doesn't really matter.
Whatever.
It's fine. He raises. It's great. So the question is, should Colum consider folding here? Because we can see ultimately he calls, but I think maybe he should have considered it a little bit more.
I think against almost the entire world population in poker, this is a fold.
Okay.
Everyone almost always has it in this spot. Like, we have a very strong range. It isn't like our opponent's been like our opponent, if he wanted to bluff, could have bluffed the turn. What can we beat here except a weird naked ace of clubs play?
Right. This seems like the best bluffing hands that Zadelhoff has in his range are ace 3, ace 4, and ace 5, all with the ace of clubs, because he
Right.
blocks the most likely full houses that Colum can have, and he blocks the nut flush.
Those are the things
Those are the best bluffing hands, but he has to pull the trigger on those and have those hands for him
Right.
to have those hands. Otherwise, it's mostly just a random bluff if Zadelhoff is bluffing, right?
Right, and I don't know if he has that many of those. Maybe he does. If he has lots of them, fine, we can call. But against most players, the way this hand is played out with our super strong range, the 7 high flush is almost never good, even though it's hard to figure out what's beating us. I'll
Right.
say that. Really hard.
And to make it clear, we're losing to all of Zadelhoff's value. He's not raising a
Yes.
weaker flush. He's not raising just trip queens. And he's probably not playing those hands this way anyway. He's probably barreling the turn with all of those hands nonetheless.
If I had to guess, I would assume I got beat by the nut flush that checked back the turn. The nut
Right.
flush draw that checked back the
Three's
turn.
full actually makes the most sense of all hands.
It does.
It turns out.
It does.
Right. So the big problem here for Colum is that, as we were saying, when Colum bets, he's mostly repping a queen or better, and Zadelhoff is raising anyway. So, of course, you have to call with some things, but you have to make a distribution-related decision here. And the 7 high flush might not be high enough in our distribution because we have 3s full, 4s full, 5s full, and bigger flushes. We have plenty of bigger flushes.
See, now you say that, and that makes perfect sense to me, but let's see what the solver says. Because if you take a look, the solver does not agree with us.
No,
The solver
not at all. The
feels-
solver hates us, and it wants to bury us in the ground.
Yeah, the solver is like, no, first of all, you call 98.5% of the time, and when you call instead of folding, even with the 7 high flush, it's worth 3.6 million more chips. That's 6 blinds. That's significant.
It is significant.
Now, the solver's, of course, playing in a world where it's playing against itself and a balanced opponent who will have bluffs and things like that. But still, the solver thinks this is clearly high enough up in its distribution.
Right, and this is where we differ from the solver because we're playing in the real world and not against GTO bots, not against Christoph Vogelsang every time. Players have tendencies. Players have practical decisions that they make, and we believe that most good players are going to make the same decisions that Zadelhoff made in this hand with this hand. We don't believe those good players are going to be raising hands like pocket 8s as a bluff. So it feels like just in the practical world, there's not enough hands that we're beating with a 7 high flush to call, even though if we're playing solver against solver, that may be the case.
It seems like solver versus solver, it's a call. Solver versus any human in the world, not anyone, most humans in the world, it's a fold, right?
Yeah.
All right, so the solver not on board with our, this is definitely a fold spot on the river.
The solver quite on board with Colum, in fact.
Yeah. So what do you guys think? Do you think, we're saying sort of practically in the real world, this is just a fold because they always have it or almost always have it. Is that your experience? Do you find yourself bluff raising in this spot more often than we're assuming? Or do you think actually that, nope, when I raise the river in this spot, or a spot like this, of course, I'm just going to have it a lot, and my opponents seem to have it too? Let us know. We'd really like to hear what you have to say in the comments.
We would like that. We would also like you to check out our book. It's called How Can He Fold? Incredible poker hands broken down decision by decision. I said that with a lot of energy because I am very passionate about this book. It is 37 tournament hands, text conversations between me and Jonathan about these hands, starting with the least complex hands, ending on the most complex hands. You'll learn, you'll have fun, you might even make a few friends along the way. Check it out at thepokerguys.net. It's in the description of this video.
It's got like 5 stars on Amazon.
That's-
It's the real deal,
That's
people.
hella cool.